Hey everyone, I wanted to do a real quick video here. I just beat Control 2-0, Jeskai Control, and I think there is um, a misunderstanding of the Control matchup amongst people who play Loam. I think a lot of people seem to think it's a bad matchup for Loam, and yeah, I mean, sure, sometimes they just like have all the answers right, and there's not much you can do, but I wanted to make this video just to quickly highlight that I think the control matchup is quite good, and I think a lot of newer players with the deck really struggle against it. Um, so I want to go over this matchup just to um, show that it is actually very good in general. So I'm going to replay this match against my Jeskai opponent here and just do commentary over my lines. Um, so I'm on the play. I don't know that he's control at this point, of course. This is my hand. I decided to keep. It's a little slow, but we've got I decide I'm going to go turn 1 Bog tapped, and then into turn 2 Bob, turn 3 Knight, and I've got Punishing Fire Grove plus a Saga. These hands can sometimes be, obviously this is a terrible hand versus combo, but I'm going to keep... I have a hard time mulling these kinds of hands, because I think it's actually quite good if you get going against a fair deck. One of those things is, like, mulligans are really hard with Loam, and a lot of people sort of think the deck's bad if you just don't have Mox Diamond, and that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes, of course, it is. You get worse hands if you don't have Mox, but I think there's plenty of keepable hands without it if you know that, you're going to be drawing into a lot of... Like, the deck top decks very well. So I'm on the play. I start out with Bog tapped, just to get that black source for Bob. My opponent plays an island and says go. I untap. I play the Bob off Grove because I don't want to reveal Caracas in case this is Sneak and Show, and I don't want to play out Saga yet because my plan is to play Knight the following turn. Opponent forces Bob and pitches Snapcaster, so at this point I know there's some kind of control deck. Play Scalding Tarn Pass here. Emperor's a good draw. That would be Comet in paper, but really either way, it's quite good here. I try to cast Knight. It resolves. Knight's pretty bad because we don't have any like mana sources that interact with it, but it's still a body, and it's something they have to deal with eventually. Opponent plays Land Pass. I elect to not attack here. I think a lot of people might make the mistake of attacking because there's no Knightable lands, but I don't want to run into a Snapcaster this early and give my opponent that kind of value. So I decided to just play Saga Pass. And against Control, like, one of the key things to keep in mind is that you want to go one plan at a time, so you always have card advantage. So, like, for example, I didn't want to play out the second Knight here either, because I don't want to play into a Supreme Verdict or some kind of answer that just blows me out for playing both creatures. So I just end up passing here. Control often has to expend a certain number of resources to deal with one threat at a time. So if you play one threat and pass and let them try to figure out how to handle it, then your following threats are going to be that much better rather than them having an answer for simultaneous threats, something like a Supreme Verdict. So here I'm thinking I'm not going to attack with Knight because I don't want to get blown out by Snap, but also I've got the Saga that's about to start ticking up. So I'm not really concerned about casting Emperor yet either. And I've also got active Punishing Fire. So I just passed the turn here. Opponent fetches for Plains and then fetches for Island and plays Narset and finds a prismatic ending, so I know that my knight's going to eat it probably. So here I elect to Punishing Fire EOT because my opponent's tapped out. This way I can just kill the Narset by attacking. So I get rid of Narset, and I play the Mox pitching Blast Zone to grow constructs, and also to get me a second white for Emperor eventually. Here, opponent plays a Emperor of their own to exile Knight. It allows me to get Punishing Fire back. I elect not to cast Emperor here, again, because I think a lot of players would just jam Emperor into a force or whatever. But here, I know I've already got Saga, and I know how good Saga is against control, so I'm just going to make the constructs and focus on one plan at a time. So I make a construct, and I untap. Loam is an excellent draw here, because it allows us to just go with the Saga plan. So I make both constructs, and I try to Loam back Saga and Blast Zone, and it will get Force of Negation. But that's honestly better than our Punishing Fire getting Fawned, because P-Fire is great against control if you can avoid Fawn. It did get worse after the printing of Fawn, but it's still quite good as a way to take care of Planeswalkers or pressure life total over the long term. So I've got two constructs. I kill the Emperor with one of them and pass the turn. Untap, find Bob, which is another great draw. I swing for 6 here. Both are bigger than Snapcaster Mage. And I elect to cast Bob here because... Oh, actually I don't. I decide I don't want to cast Bob. I thought about it, but then I pass because, it's, like I said before, I don't want to walk into Supreme Verdict. My opponent has Verdict mana. And also I've got active P-Fire for a threat. And I've got an Emperor if I want to cast that, but I don't need to throw creatures on the board right now. I've got enough power as it is. My opponent's going to have to deal with 2 3/3s eventually, and I'd rather him expend answers on those than Bob. So I decide not to cast anything, and I pass the turn. Emperor opponent has second Emperor here, which is not a big deal. I elect a P-Fire in response. And get it back. Opponent decides to just make a 2/2 instead of exiling one of my 3/3s, but he dress downs and takes care of the Sagas and then hits for 2. So here, now my opponent has taken care of one of my active threat, so I draw a Wasteland, which is great. You always want to be pressuring Control's mana if you can. I decide to cast Bob. I've got P-Fire up, and I want to waste Tundra. So I elect to cast Bob with P-Fire for this token instead of Emperor. I'm waiting to cast this. It's kind of my trump, and I want to get out all my other threats before I cast Emperor, if possible. You kind of want to pick your spots. So he plows Bob, which is fine. I should have wasted Tundra and then gone to second main and cast Bob. That was a misplay, because then he would have had to use his mana on his turn to plow Bob, so that was a mistake, but it didn't end up mattering. I elect to P-Fire the token, opponent fawns, which is unfortunate, but at least I wait till his turn to do that, so that he has to expend mana. He's tapped out. I draw Dark Depths, which is not the worst draw. It presents half of a threat, and then I pass the turn thinking to cast Emperor here. But I'm going to wait to do it. I didn't want to do it on my turn because I want to see what he does first. So he's going to Ending the Mox, which I think is pretty aggressive. I Emperor in response. He Spell Pierces, which is kind of a blowout, but that's still okay. I think in that situation, I wanted to... I was going to try to wait to Emperor until he attacks so that he doesn't attack my Emperor and I can make a 2/2 and trade. But he forced it with the ending on Mox and then had the Pierce. But that's fine. Fable's a really good draw here. So I cast Fable and make the 2/2. Here I'm thinking... I debated blocking or not, and I eventually decided to block to trade here because what I want to do is I'm going to draw a card, and then if it's bad, I can just swap both out with the second Fable mode. And if it's good, then I can just swap the Knight out, which isn't the best. Opponent endings, which is fine. I draw a sudden edict, which is pretty bad here, but so like that turn, if my opponent had an ending Fable, then I discard Edict and Knight and try to find something relevant. Instead, he does ending the Fable, and I cast my Knight, which is my only threat remaining. So here I'm a little nervous about my position, but opponent only has 2 cards in hand, and you really just want to tax their resources and make sure they don't have card advantage over you if possible. Opponent endings Knight, and then I draw Minsc and Boo, which is excellent, but I can't cast it yet, so I pass. Opponent passes with 1 card in hand. I find the land, and then I cast Minsc, and opponent scoops from there because he's out of answers and doesn't find one of the 3 endings he's already used this game. So you can sort of see why I think the control matchup's actually quite good, because if you play your threats and you time them correctly, then your opponent's resources are going to be taxed. So here, he's already used 3 endings, and I then get to cast my trump. And I've got several trumps in the deck against control, which is why I play 5 different walkers, because all of them are must-answer threats against these grindy matchups. And he just runs out of gas. And you see how many threats have to be answered. They forced of negation both Loam and Punishing Fire. I dealt with both their Emperors. They had to dress down Saga tokens, and then they had 3 endings to deal with Knights and Bobs and what have you, and then you've got Minsc and Boo as sort of the final card. Like, you will run them out of resources if you play them correctly. Game 2. So usually against control of pretty much any variant, I board out all my Knights. And I usually keep in 0 to 2 chalices because I'm bringing in blasts. The cool part about boarding out Knight is that they often will keep their removal in, and then it kind of just makes the removal bad if you're just jamming walkers in their face. Most people who don't know enough about Loam or haven't played since Loam was kind of a tier deck don't really understand that we board out Knights and don't play that many creatures post-board. So they keep in plows, and they don't necessarily... I get you have to answer Bob, but I don't always think that's correct. This hand is fine against control because we're on the draw, and because this game's going to go long anyway. Opponent leads with a fetch and passes. I play a fetch and pass. Tundra pass from opponent. And here's another mistake. People may run out Bob here to try to get a draw engine going, but it is just correct to play Chalice because Chalice protects your Bob from Plow. And you also, when I keep in 2 Chalice, I don't really care about it. It's kind of here's a thing that may do something. If you deal with it, that's 1 less ending on a Planeswalker or whatever. Or 1 less Force of Will. So opponent brainstorms in response, fetches, and then Spell Pierces. So I actually 2-for-1 my opponent here. I force him to brainstorm when he may not have otherwise, and I get rid of the Pierce, which protects Grist. Opponent plays Narset, finds Force of Will, which is pretty good. I cast a Bob here. He lets it resolve. I play the fetch out. So my plan here is I presume he has a plow or finds one, which he does. So at this point in time, I actually feel pretty behind, but this is a really good game to show you an example of why Loam is actually quite good. Because my opponent has 7 cards and an active Narset. I've got a Bob, he's about to answer it, and I've got 5 cards. So I'm behind on board and in hand. But our threats are powerful, and all you need is for one to resolve. So he brainstorms, and my plan is to fetch Dryad Arbor here. And then he ponders, and he's got a Caracas. So I fetch Arbor, end of turn. He doesn't have an answer for it, so I get to kill Narset, which I'm happy to do. Ren is a great draw. Most of our draws are super relevant post-board against control, which is pretty nice that your top decks are so live. So here, Grist is just a trump every time, and I'd rather bait out the Ren. So here's another example. Obviously, this is a minor example of it because Ren and Grist are both excellent. But Grist is slightly better. You're adding to the board with Grist in a more difficult to deal with way than you are with Ren. And so I want to bait the Force for Grist rather than save the Ren. So I cast Ren into a force, which I expected here. Opponent plays a land and passes. I cast Grist, and now it resolves because Ren got forced, and opponent doesn't have an immediate answer. I tick up Grist, and I don't attack here, actually, because I leave up Punishing Fire. I think it's more equitable to leave up a P-Fire than to run into a Snapcaster there and get in the 1 damage. Mox is the draw here. I play it, and I pitch out Caracas, and then I tick up first, so I have active Barbering. I have 7 cards in the yard, plus Punishing Fire and Ending. So now I'm attacking for 2, and opponent is down to 16 and casts Fairy Mastermind. I elect to Barbering there, and the reason is it's not counterable, and Mastermind is a 2/1 that flies, so he's going to start pressuring the Grist. So rather than running my Punishing Fire into a Fawn, I just Barbering Mastermind there. Opponent ponders and brainstorms and plays a fetch. I continue to tick up Grist and just keep going at him with 1/1s that I don't really care if they die to Snapcaster, because it's just amassing a bunch of 1/1s on the board. Opponent's still looking for an answer to Grist here. He Savines a Narset and finds a Force of Will and passes. So again, this is an example. There is no reason for me to cast Punishing Fire into some kind of force here. I've got enough pressure on board to most likely kill the Narset, and I'd rather just save the cards in my hand. Loam is an excellent draw here. I continue to tick up Grist, and I go all out at Narset in case he's got a Plow or a piece of removal. I get rid of the Narset. I try to cast Loam, and I play Barbering. Loam Barbering this is part of the reason Ring is in the deck, is this combo is excellent against Control. It seems bad, but like, that's 2 damage a turn every turn that can't be countered unless they deal with Loam. So now they're expending resources, and this is what I mean when I talk about angles in this deck, is my opponent is now being pincered by Loam and Grist, so they've got to find an ending for Grist, and they've got to find a Fawn for Loam, because both of these are very live threats. And I still have the Punishing Fire in my hand, plus a way to answer any Planeswalker they might cast. So now, opponent Surgical's Library just to see my deck and concedes. They have 4 cards in hand, but they know that they're beat 3 ways, right? They're beat to Life from the Loam, plus Barbering, plus Punishing Fire. They're beat to 5 1/1s on the board, and they're at 10 life, and they're beat to this active Grist. And so now you're taxing, they have 6 mana, and you're taxing 4 cards in the hand to deal with 3 different angles. Not the same angle, right? You've got the creature angle, you've got an engine over here in Life from the Loam, and you've got a non-creature permanent. And they have to deal with it using 3 different methods. And most of the time, like, sure, sometimes Control's going to have all the answers, right? But most of the time they're not. Most of the time they're going to brick on something. Most of the time they're not going to be able to answer everything you're throwing at them if you play things in the right order, and if you're patient. Patience and sequencing is the biggest key to beating Control in Legacy with Loam. Don't play out all your threats at once. Save your removal as long as possible. Utilize all of your utility lands. Pay attention to sequencing, and beat them with non-creature permanents one at a time. And also, if you can, at any chance, take out their mana. Mana denial is excellent versus Control, just denying them resources in any way possible, including baiting. So keep those things in mind, and hopefully this helps a little bit with the matchup, and good luck.